Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Spring 2024 Author Forum. We've gathered today to discuss the 2022 article, Understanding Academic Librarians' One-Shot Instructional Design Process via a Delphi Study with Dr. Kirsten Hostetler. My name is Brittany Ballard, and I am the co-chair of the ACRL Distance and Online Learning Sections Research and Publication Committee, or RPC. And I'm so grateful that you are all choosing to spend some time and energy with us this Wednesday, March 6, 2024. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce our speaker. Dr. Hostetler is the Instruction and Outreach Faculty Librarian at Central Oregon Community College, where she leads the library's instructional program and assessment efforts. She's also a senior research analyst with Project Information Literacy, a nonprofit research institute that conducts national mixed method studies on how adults find and use information during their higher education years. Kirsten received her Master of Library and Information Science from the University of Washington iSchool and her PhD from Old Dominion University, where she received the 2020 to 2021 Alan Mendel Endowed Award for Instructional Design and Technology. We will begin our time together today with a brief presentation so that even if you didn't read that study I mentioned earlier and we'll be linking to shortly in the chat, you'll still be able to have a brief summary of the work that Dr. Hostetler did and engage with us in some conversation a little bit later. So please, Kirsten, take it away.
Thank you so much. I first want to say thank you to the members of the Research and Publications Committee for inviting me to speak. Put a lot of work into making this happen today, so thank you for that. And I always love having more of a discussion than a presentation, so I'm going to really try to keep it to 20 minutes, even though I can be long-winded on this topic. So let's get started. So this article was adapted for my dissertation research, but it was definitely something that I've probably been thinking about since the first time I entered the classroom, because when I first entered the classroom, it was the first time I had ever taught in my entire life. And I will spare you all the gory details today, but best believe it was not a pretty sight for me. And in that moment, classic imposter syndrome in the library, I felt like something was wrong with me, right? That I had this degree that had qualified me for this role, but I still wasn't qualified. Maybe there's a class that I missed or I wasn't paying enough attention. So cut to me working on my dissertation research in spring 2020. I had enrolled at Old Dominion University in their instructional design and technology program. And I have, of course, discovered that my lack of training was not a me issue. It was a larger field issue, right? So I wanted to turn my research focus on developing an exploratory study that looked at librarians' teaching practices through an instructional design lens. So there is already a ton of literature out there about the issues that librarians face when it comes to teaching and instructional design. Master's degree programs for library and information science inconsistently introduce these types of principles, design models, teaching strategies, with one analysis finding that 35% of US MLIS programs ask students to enroll in only one instructional course in the entire curriculum, really giving it limited instructional opportunities for exposure and practice. Additionally, a survey of professional working academic librarians found that 52% of respondents only felt partly or minimally prepared for the instructional roles that they were placed in after graduating from MLIS programs, really mirroring my own experiences with this. So my literature review findings suggested that many librarians enter this field ill-equipped to handle the environments in which we teach, and they're expected to learn on the job and develop their own processes to execute their day-to-day instructional responsibilities. And then the other unique component for teaching librarians, of course, is the environment in which we teach. So I think maybe I'm preaching to the choir when I say that one-shot information literacy sessions have a lot of deficiencies, right? Around time limitations, inconsistent access to student information, inconsistent integration across the curriculum. And for many, one-shots are really just considered ineffective in working on those critical thinking competencies that are essential to information literacy. But that doesn't mean that they're going anywhere anytime soon. One survey of almost 700 academic librarians showed that 94% of respondents still relied on one-shot as their one instructional medium. So clearly librarians, or not their one, but one of several, but it was still a popular method. And so librarians find something redeeming about them, even if it's just this is really our only method to expose students to a librarian at a time when they probably need some librarian assistance. And at the end of the day, it's better to take advantage of that instructional opportunity despite its limitations rather than not being included in the classroom at all. So that's why I really wanted to target the one-shot environment, because I really wanted to understand librarians' design practices and decision-making when it came to these unique environments. So with that background, the research questions that drove the study were how does previous professional training experiences regarding instruction prepare academic librarians for instructional responsibilities, specifically in the one-shot? What are academic librarians' preferred strategies and design models for designing one-shot sessions? And how do academic librarians make design decisions when selecting these strategies and models? So when thinking about how I wanted to approach answering those research questions, I really wanted to find a methodology that valued the lived experiences of librarians, because I really wanted to come away with practical recommendations for the field. And in order to make practical recommendations, it needed to be based in these authentic practices of those who were actually doing the work. So when considering the various approaches, I kept coming back to the Delphi technique. It's been used in the library literature. If you're familiar with the studies that led up to the development of the framework, Delphi was used with that. But it's also used outside of the library literature, where it's become an accepted consensus building method in fields like allied health, business, and education. And what it is just an iterative survey design that acts as an effective, flexible means of structuring communication when addressing complex and ill-structured problems. So the role of a Delphi is to produce practical recommendations because of its reliance on expert judgment. And the experts have both the theoretical understanding of the field as well as the firsthand experience of the topic. So I followed the standard Delphi procedures with this study, which is 3 rounds of surveys. It gives participants an opportunity to brainstorm ideas in that first round, really just kind of brain dump, consolidate the ideas in the second round, and then rank the ideas in the final round to develop a consensus. So to get started, I began recruiting participants from a national academic library listserv as well as social media. And my goal recruitment was 20 participants. The average range in a typical Delphi study is 10 to 20. Larger sample sizes beyond that are discouraged with Delphi because the role of this type of method is not to create statistically significant results, but the smaller sample sizes really help avoid attrition and disagreements when you're seeking that consensus. So even with that smaller sample size, attrition rates can be pretty high as 30% for Delphi studies because of the extended time commitment that it takes to participate in all the different rounds. The overall attrition rate for my study was 32%, just a little bit higher than that average, but I had 17 participants complete all 3 rounds, so it fit within that standard participant range. So 39 participants, or 39 librarians completed the participant inclusion criteria survey during my recruitment stage. And it was really just a way to determine if they met my established criteria for inclusion, which was partially based on Delphi standards and partially based on establishing them as experts in information literacy. So the interested participants completed an 8-question survey asking if they graduated from a US MLIS program, if they had the capacity and willingness to participate in the study, the effective communication skills to describe their design process in a written survey, worked at least 3 years in an academic library where they were directly responsible for teaching at least 100 information literacy one-shots in that academic library environment. So of the 39 participants, 14 were eliminated for not meeting that inclusion criteria, which left 25 participants in my initial sample. I didn't collect any other demographic data from my participants because it wasn't really relevant to my data analysis or my design. So of the 25 participants, 19 completed that first round survey, which was developed with 3 questions. Each measured one, so there are 3 questions aligned to each of the research questions, and that helps with internal consistency, plus 1 open comment box for a total of 10 questions on that first round survey. That survey was pilot tested for clarity and content and face validity by 3 academic librarians who also met the inclusion criteria. I used 2 level of coding the qualitative responses from the first round survey. So I started with descriptive coding, which really used the participants' authentic experiences in their own words. And then the secondary coding method was pattern coding, where I manually organized these themes into metacodes using analytic memos. And that resulted in 73 statements in the first round survey that was used to develop the second round survey. So 18 participants completed that second round survey. They were asked to rank the 73 statements on a 4-point Likert scale. And this is the consolidation phase. So taking that brainstorming list and really moving it towards a consensus. So the survey was divided into 3 different sections with statements organized by research question. And then the participants were also given an open text box at the end of each section to provide any additional feedback. Statements that were ranked with a mean equivalent 2 or higher than 3 were considered part of an emerging consensus to be included in the third round survey. This is a very strict benchmark, but I wanted to give any statement that was kind of on the edge of being eliminated one more additional opportunity in the third round survey so that participants could continue to consider it and then provide any additional feedback or insight in that third round survey. So of the 73 statements that started in round 2, 31 met that inclusion benchmark for the third round survey. 17 participants completed that last round. And then once again, they were asked to rank those 31 statements on a 4-point Likert scale. This round, participants were given an opportunity to provide open text comments after each statement. And they were also shown their previous scores and the group mean scores to really give individuals an insight into their how their responses compared to the groups. And since this was the final round of surveys to establish that final consensus, the benchmark I used was mean equivalent to or higher than 3 and a standard deviation equivalent to or less than 0.75. And that was what I used to represent agreement. And I confirmed that with an interclass correlation coefficient, which was a value of 0.75, which is considered good level of agreement among participants. So of the 73 statements that I started with, 19 statements achieved that last consensus round in the final survey. So what did I learn? The big question. So in regard to, it's a lot, so I divided it by research questions. So in regard to research question 1, the same themes around professional development consistently rose to the top across all 3 rounds of surveys. So, and these were statements that emphasized collaboration and flexible training opportunities with low barriers. So you can see that in the round 1, conferences and collaboration were the most frequently mentioned. Then classroom experience and professional organizations ranked highly in round 2, and classroom experiences and collaboration ranked highest in round 3, with 4 statements aligned to question 1 regarding training meeting that final consensus. Another element that I like to call out because it was like such a large part of my interest in this topic was in regard to the MLIS curriculum. So I really thought this was going to be a really cut and dry, like everyone's going to be like, nope, I didn't have it based on the literature review. And it was a little bit more complicated than that. The first round of surveys, frequency mentions of the theme instruction, pedagogy, and instructional design were not covered in my MLS program, were equivalent to the 2 themes, either that they were covered or that at least they were covered in an academic track. So basically it was this even split in that first round of survey. But ultimately, participants did agree that while instruction may have been available in their own programs, it was usually confined to a single class. So they still didn't feel prepared to teach just based off of their graduate training. So that the only statement that achieved that final consensus was the statement indicating the MLIS was still lacking. So for research question 1, the first takeaway was that participants expressed a need for experiential training. So of the final 5 statements in the final round survey, 3 expressed a desire for improving knowledge of instructional strategies and design models through direct observations and experiences. And this consensus around outlets that weren't passive meant participants could really get that hands-on experience with new strategies. It was still an aspirational outlet for many participants who hadn't really found a venue for it, but they really wanted to emphasize how important it was to have that practical application of skills in a social context when they were learning. Another takeaway for research question 1 was the appeal of collaboration as a professional development medium. So informal and formal collaboration and observation of peers was seen as essential for innovative approaches in the classroom, as well as developing strong relationships with their peers of librarians and their peers as disciplinary faculty. Additionally, participants frequently mentioned institutional barriers to accessing professional development, particularly in regard to support, time allotted for training, and exorbitant costs for more formal learning opportunities. So collaboration was seen, particularly the type that could be conducted asynchronously via things like listservs, was really viewed as an essential outlet for this professional development. In regard to research question 2, it produced 32% of the meta themes in round 1 of those statements, and backward design and one-on-one work with students ranked highest. But the second round had the fewest statements that progressed from round 2 to round 3, and the fewest statements included in the final consensus. There were only 2 statements that aligned to research question 2, demonstration as a frequently used strategy and backward design as a frequently deployed design model. And they both emerged as the consensus as early as round 2. So I don't think that the lack of consensus around this question is really due to librarians not using the strategies and models that I found in my literature review, as well as the ones that emerged from the round 1 brainstorming stage. But the nature of the brainstorming stage is to just like list all of the strategies and models that you're familiar with, right? And then when it came down to generalizing, what do you use consistently across a wide variety of scenarios and contexts, participants agreed that they turned to these highly flexible and customizable methods that really center learning objectives. So by far, my biggest takeaway was in this research question number 2 was the emergence of backward design as a model that participants frequently depended on. I didn't find backward design in my initial literature review. So once I saw this as an emerging consensus, I went back and I did a couple more searches, and there isn't a ton that meaningfully engages with backward design as a model that librarians use, especially in a one-shot environment. But despite that, participants describe backward design as the most relevant to their design approaches. They discussed a familiarity with learning outcomes as something that was covered in their MLIS program. So if they had limited instructional exposure in their program, at the very least, they learned learning outcomes. And so that felt very intuitive for them to incorporate backward design in their process. So it was less of a burden. And it really served as an adaptable foundation that librarians could build additional frameworks on top of, like critical pedagogy and more motivational learning models. A second takeaway for the second research question was in regard to demonstration as a consistent instructional strategy. So participants really struggled to find that consensus with this question. And it really is based on the importance of like personal style, the class context, instructor expectations, and just a variety of other factors, right? So, but demonstration was a common method because after a quick demo, students could easily apply what they learned to their own assignment or topic. And then it's also easily adaptable in the moment if you enter a classroom and you discover students are way more advanced or maybe a little bit less prepared than you previously anticipated. By far, the most identified themes and the most frequency mentions were in response to the third research question prompts. So in the first round, comfort level with the instructor and knowledge of students' previous experience topped the rankings. Then in the second round, class context and relevance were the highest ranked, and that held for the third round as well, with the final consensus containing 13 statements relating to research question 3. So 13 statements of the total 19 that achieved the final consensus were aligned to research question 3. So it was really clear that reflecting on their own rationale for making design decisions really resonated with librarians, despite the lack of research I found in this area in my literature review. So there was a wide range of factors that contributed to how participants made design decisions, and those that emphasized convenience and adaptability when information and time was limited were most favored. So I grouped this as interesting. This was the most difficult to adapt for my dissertation research to the article. I grouped the takeaways from research question 3 into 4 categories that I refer to as aspiration levels in the article. And I base this aspiration levels on Simon's bounded rationality and satisficing in artificial systems, which was my conceptual framework in my dissertation research. So according to Simon, aspiration levels are the internal standards that people use that signal when problem solving can end, when a satisfactory, though not ideal, decision or outcome is reached. So obviously, one shot's not ideal. And so where are we satisficing, as Simon says, to make these design decisions? So these levels represent what participants used as the criteria for making design decisions for one shots. So the first aspiration level was instructional design priorities criteria, or any statements that emphasized any considerations for how the one shot would be taught using motivational elements, active learning, assessment strategies, and strategies that worked based on previous experiences and that fit within a developed teaching identity. The second level was goal-driven criteria, which really centered statements relevant to establishing clear, measurable objectives that were frequently developed in conjunction with the instructor. So instructor expectations really defined student performance gaps, and that prompted the development of the lesson outcomes. Now, as librarians started to work more frequently with the same faculty over and over, they felt more comfortable making assumptions about these outcomes and really detailing the outcomes on their own. So that meant that established relationships really allowed participants to insert their own information literacy expertise into the design of the one-shot. The development of outcomes were also largely shaped by the context aspiration level. So for this criteria, participants relied on more traditional instructional design needs assessments that took into consideration things like class context, the discipline, relevant assignment, the course level, and any user analysis of students' previous experiences conducting research that they could ascertain. So participants expressed how important these analyses were to their design processes, even though they were often limited or difficult to come by prior to the one-shot itself. Which leads me to the final aspiration, which is the limitations of one-shots. Participants' design decisions were very much constrained by the nature of what a one-shot is. So available time, the inability to teach too many complex objectives in one session. Oftentimes, participants would fall back just on making sure that students viewed the library and themselves as really valuable resources. So the implications of this study validate my literature review results in that participants developed a consensus around the limitations of their professional training. They had contradictory constraints and opportunities that were found in one-shots, and they really had a need for flexible approach to their design process. So results from my study outside the most frequently cited design models that were specific to the one-shot medium we're centering learners, centering learners, the learning outcomes and the student experience and the class context. Design models that were created for more curricular and credit design just weren't easily adaptable to the one-shot model. And so that adoption of the backward design model, which is a more flexible approach, was more easily integrated into their instructional design priorities. My study also reflects the continuing struggle that librarians face to blend that day-to-day practitioner role with the larger research and theory of the field. I think that the implication of the results and the recommendations in the article suggest a way forward where academic librarians can really adopt instructional design priorities through a more layered approach that is flexible in its ability to adjust to the practical limitations of times, resource, and context, but doesn't feel divorced from some of the cool stuff that's being done in more theory-based research. And I also think that study supports the need for updates to the MLIS curriculum. It gives, trying to give it the same instructional weight in the graduate training as is present in professional responsibilities and roles. So greater exposure to instructional design principles and practice with those principles that take into consideration the unique circumstances of the environment in which we teach could really better equip academic librarians into entering the field, especially at a time where information literacy competencies are becoming increasingly vital. So that brings me to an end of my summary. Thank you all again, and I'm really looking forward to your questions and our discussion.
Hi there. This is Mo Chakraborty. I'm the co-chair of this committee. Kirsten, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I hope everybody got, even if you didn't read the article, her slides were, that explained self-explanatory. So while people are still thinking of questions to put in the chat, because I don't see any questions yet, the committee actually has some questions for you, Kirsten. So we want to know, what are you working on now? Like next?
Yeah.
What cool things are you doing now?
Oh gosh. Well, the problem is that, not the problem. The good thing is after I did my research, I had 2 kids. So it's really slowed down my production. Having toddlers is its own project in of itself. But I have continued working with project information literacy, and we're currently in the middle. To yesterday was our last day in the field of getting surveys. We're doing something different for PIL, which is we're doing a general population survey as well as a college student survey on how people, I always refer to them as students. I can't refer to them as students anymore. How people find information and evaluate information regarding climate change. So it's a really big survey that we just finished, and the next steps are writing up results for a report mid-June. So yeah, that's been keeping me busy too. So not a ton following up on some of my favorite research focus on instructional design and one-shots, but some fun things with PIL that's been keeping me busy.
Hey, so continuing with our questions and our committee, and we have some of our committee members here. I see Ella, Catherine, I don't know who else is here, and Ella and Ruth were instrumental in coming up with these questions, so thank you again. So the other questions we have: how has the research informed your practices as a librarian? Has there been internal changes within your department to develop to layers of necessity to background design, or add additional hands-on training, professional development for librarians?
Yeah, so I am in a community college setting, and it's always funny when I hear like, oh, she leads the instruction efforts at her college. I'm like the only one doing instruction at my college. There's me and one other librarian who are responsible for instruction, and so it wasn't hard to make changes in my library, because it's like, hey, Kirsten, do you want to make changes? So, I think one aspect that I've been exploring, especially, my research, I was very, very lucky. I did my survey online, and I deployed my survey in March 2020. So that also could have been some cause for some of my attrition, as people got very overwhelmed very quickly, right? So I think something that I have kind of done in the wake of everything that happened was focusing more on effective learning and metacognition in my one-shots, which is not easy to do when you have really defined like outcomes with faculty. But luckily, having worked in the same environment for a very long time, I have really solid relationships with faculty who've allowed me to explore and play around. And especially when they were like, you're throwing stuff up online anyway, like just do something different. So it was a good time to make changes, I think. And so, yeah, that was kind of my layers of necessity approach. Was I had this kind of standard way of teaching, and then I really wanted to focus more on, yeah, that more like holistic side to the student, how they were doing, how they were feeling, the anxieties that present themselves in the research process, feeling that confidence level, and adapting kind of their authentic practices to an academic library environment, which is also maybe a bit easier in a community college setting because you have these really like strong connections to the real world and professional applications pretty quickly in a community college. So I've been using Oregon has it's like a Shakespeare villain. It's called a LAGO. It's the Information Literacy Advisory Group of Oregon, and they created a metacognitive tool based off of the framework. That I can send it to you for you to share with participants, because it's been really helpful in framing how I think about that effective side of students and how I can approach it in the classroom. I framed my credit class around it, and so I use it kind of as like an icebreaker for a lot of my one-shots as well. So I can share that with you.
Sure.
That would be helpful. It's a really cool tool.
So how other than the fact, like the timing of like when you administered the survey, March of 2020, what other thing that surprised you the most about the result of your research?
Definitely the backward design. It was funny because I do think as a new librarian, I remember that being a really it felt very intuitive. It felt very like, okay, here's what I need students to demonstrate at the end. What do I need to do now to get them to achieve that? So it did feel like a very low barrier, but still effective model. And it was funny because when participants started saying it, and they would describe it in a way without necessarily saying backward design, they would just describe, I start with my outcomes, and then so they would describe it in a way that was like met the very definition, but without even referring to it as backward design. It was just a process they developed on their own. And I was thinking, I was like, I've already written my literature review, and that didn't come up at all. And so that was surprising to me that this thing that just people were doing naturally hasn't really been explored that much within the library context. So
Actually, we do have a question about backward design in the chat, but I'm going to read out the question, and then Krista, you can just like say like if Kirsten already answered your questions or if you want any follow-up. So she's asking, did you learn anything surprising or gain a deeper understanding of backward design since it is the overwhelming pedagogy? I know you touched upon it. Krista, was that enough? Do you want her to expand on it or?
Yeah, I guess I was just curious because I really was not, I don't have a strong education or pedagogy background. And so a lot of the terminology is new to me, as well as I am a new academic librarian compared to my previous environments. And I have never heard that term. So I was just wondering if this is something that, is like we should all know about that. We should have a more thorough understanding of it as a structured pedagogy, or was there anything that you found that as you were going through all of the responses and it was kind of naturally coming up? Was it that they had been taught, but they just didn't remember the terminology? Was it that they had never had any formal education in that? Or how do you kind of, I don't know, correlate the fact that this was overwhelming and yet no one's ever heard of it?
Well, so thank you for the question, Krista. And I will say you were not alone, no matter your experience in the library. Like I said, part of the inclusion criteria was they had to have taught 100 one-shot sessions over a 3-year period. So they, 3 years is still new, but, relatively experienced in the field. It's not an unknown model. In instructional design world, it is a pretty standard thing. So I felt comfortable with it in that I had been working on my PhD in instructional design. So like I had been comfortable through it that way. But it's just not well known in the library world as a design model. So, I don't think it's, I think it's representative of what I found from my results is that librarians recognize that teaching is an essential part of their jobs. They feel like a strong desire. And I mean, as librarians, we all are like, oh, I don't know something. I need to find out, right? I was like, oh, I don't know something. I need to get a PhD in it. That was, like, I think that's just the nature of librarians somewhat. And so there's a strong desire and a strong motivation to find these deeper engagement with instructional design methods, educational theory, pedagogy, all of that. There's just a strong motivation to do it, but the timing of it, the ability to afford more formal opportunities, things like that. The willingness to try it in a classroom, especially if you're on a campus where like, if I do something new and it fails, is the instructor going to invite me back? That fear, it depends on your relationship with faculty. All of that can play a role in being willing to explore and then get practice with it. Because like you can do all this theory and reading, but where are you going to get the practice of actually implementing it? If you feel like, well, a student is going to walk out of here and they're not going to know EBSCOhost or whatever. And so, yeah, you're not alone. I don't think that it's like a flaw to not have the official name of it. It was just something that, yeah, a lot of the participants really just were. Someone did cite the authors. I think it's like Wiggins and McTee is the authors of Backward Design. Understanding by Design is a really good book. If you're new to the instructional design game and you want to read further, that's a good low barrier entry point to backward design and greater theory. So someone did cite the authors, and then some people were just like, I start with the outcomes and I think about what students should achieve to reach those outcomes and then design activities based off of that. And that's a straightforward backward design approach. So yeah, it's just varied.
Thank you. So we have another question here. Do you think your findings would be valid for online or distance learning as well?
Yes, I do. In regards to flexibility, quick adaptability, and I think that more so than ever, when we saw all of the classes transition online really quickly, the thing that instructional designers would often be like is, how are you aligning your larger learning outcomes with module learning objectives with activities? And that is, again, a straightforward backward design approach that's really talking about that alignment. And so I think it is, again, I think it's just a really intuitive way of approaching it and also a really low barrier way of approaching it. It just makes sense to think about that alignment.
And Brittany, your question was, how did you come to instructional design as a research focus? What strategies resonate most with you? And do you share the preference for backward design and demonstration, some of which like you have already touched upon? Brittany, do you want her to expand on something or?
Yeah, I think I saw in your bio, I think I remember reading that you did study a little bit of instructional design. But I'm just curious, how did your path lead there? And then thinking about your own teaching, how would you say backward design and demonstration shape it or don't?
Yeah. So I was not like I said, I entered the classroom I didn't know when I graduated if I wanted to go into academic libraries or public libraries, and it just so happened it worked out really well, that I found a position pretty quickly upon graduation. I was very lucky. And so it kind of just fell in my lap. And so that idea of like, oh, I don't know something, I need to just learn everything about it at once. I kind of had a mentor who suggested instructional design as something to guide me when I was in that early stage of like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? I don't even know what I'm doing. And so I started exploring instructional design on my own, and then that led me to want to pursue an additional degree. I don't recommend it for everyone. But you know, it was something that I felt was important to me, and I wanted to do it. So the program that I entered was an instructional design program. And that's where, you know, it was funny. I was the only librarian in my program. But it's so relevant and such strong overlap. And I feel like there's a lot that connects the two fields. My community college just hired our first instructional designer, and they're in the library, and I was like, yes. So there is kind of like a natural overlap between the two fields. So that's kind of what led me into instructional design. And then in terms of my own practice, I do think backward design was foundational to the beginning of my teaching practices. I still use it. Yeah, I think it's one of those things where when you teach the same classes over and over, it's that layers of necessity model. So like I have that foundation of how I approach it, and then I kind of build on it from there. I was surprised that demonstration made its way into the final consensus. My favorite strategy is the one-on-one, going around to students one-on-one. I have the luxury of 90 minutes in all of my one-shot sessions. I know that a more standard time period is 60 minutes, if that. So with my very luxurious 30 extra minutes, I tend to focus more on providing the, you know, the standards-based approach to an information literacy session in a one-on-one setting, because I find that, you know, I can do as much demo in the front of the room about one person's topic, but when it comes down to someone listening, like that one person is taking furious notes and the rest of the class is looking at their phones and tuning out. So I find that providing that one-on-one feedback when it's most relevant and you know, point of need type instruction just engages the students a little bit more, so that I can use the rest of my time in the class to have like more fun. I call them more fun conversations, but more of the like, you know, larger systems-based discussions, and use more discussion activities versus a database demo.
Thank you. Anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask questions or put them in the chat? While everybody's thinking, yes, you are lucky. Like not everybody has that 90 minutes thing. It's usually try to squeeze in as much as you can in a 50-minute session.
Right.
Do this, like there. So while people are still thinking, and again, feel free to unmute yourselves or put it in the chat. So we have another question here, that you have published multiple articles with your co-author, I guess, Dr. Luo.
What? Yeah.
And what are some best practices and advice for individuals looking to work with a co-author?
Yeah. So definitely. So Dr. Luo was my chair in my dissertation program. So we had a very close relationship throughout my time in the program, and produced multiple articles as a result of like classwork. And so that was really helpful for me in like illuminating the publication process, and what, you know, she was a very good mentor in terms of, you know, what is the standards that that peer review looks for in addressing peer review comments. I don't, if you've ever submitted to a peer review, reviewer number 2 can kick rocks, right? So I mean, it's like a standard thing of like learning how to take that feedback and make it productive and constructive, and not take it personally of like your whole research is dumb and you should think about changing careers. And so I think that that support was really beneficial. Having clear boundaries on in terms of the expectations of who does what was really helpful. Working with PIL it's a small research team. Usually 3 to 5 people work on those projects at a time, and I've worked on maybe 8 of them over my time working with PIL. And so that has helped me develop a strong collaborative writing process as well, because you know when you do something like that, and especially writing up bigger reports with much larger sample sizes than 19 participants, it takes a lot of division of labor, a lot of we call them like fun Google Doc sessions where you're all editing at the same time, but having that the conversation up front with your co-authors about expectations around communicating with each other, when to expect communication, when's a good time, when's not a good time to communicate, expectations around who's doing what, and then really thinking about that ego question of putting aside critiques, putting aside changes to your words that, especially with my dissertation, I'd been living with those words for a very long time. And so adapting them into an article and having people cut out, I think my final dissertation was like maybe 175 pages, and this article ended up being 30. So many precious babies got cut, right? And so you just really have to learn to deal with that ego when you're working with other people, because that feedback again is meant to be constructive and not meant to be insulting. So learning to deal with that and having clear communication around that is really essential. She was as my like teacher in a lot of my classes as well. She was used to giving me feedback. So we had already established that relationship when I was working with Dr. Lua.
So we've been asking you a lot of questions. Do you have any questions for us? Like, you have a group here or?
Oh yeah. Oh, wow. I haven't been given this opportunity in a while. Oh goodness.
Wanted it to be a conversation too.
Yes, I do. Yeah. So I guess my thought, since I have a whole group of people and I just told you I take constructive feedback. So is there anything that stood out in my article, or anything that resonate with your practices? Or I feel like one-shots are one of those topics of conversations amongst librarians where we can all share woes, but also like, what are the practical strategies that you use in the classroom that work for you? I know no one solved the one shot, but it's something that has felt like it's been successful.
I'll just offer, I don't want to take up too much time, but I'll just offer, I have really come to enjoy workshops. And so in some way, they can be a little more work than, as you mentioned, when you've done a single session sort of over and over. In some sense, a workshop is a little bit more time and energy up front, but there is potential to reach a larger audience, and there is potential to, because it's outside of another subject teaching instructor's class, there's potential for you to have a little more autonomy and flexibility in that use of time. And it's not necessarily a solution to the single session, but it's a nice, for me, exciting and restorative addition to the traditional instruction model, is being able to try new workshops and new things.
I love that idea. I've always, do you use food to entice students to attend?
You know, I sometimes, but I actually do most of I work exclusively with grad students, and most of them are actually distance learners. And
Mhm.
so, to be sure that I'm not excluding them, I tend to do most of my workshops. I'm a College of Ed librarian, so most of them are teachers anyway. I tend to do most of my workshops in the evening and online.
Yeah. Is there any topic that has been really popular?
I will say my newest workshop, digital reading and note-taking strategies, as it got requested for an encore, and that's what I'm working on now. A lot, probably more instructors attending actually than students, because there is still um, some hesitation around digital reading being as effective. And I think a lot of it is that folks just aren't aware of the tools you can use these days to mark up even web resources. Yes, we know about PDFs, but the web resource is another kind of reading, and a lot of folks aren't aware that there are tools you can use for open web resources as well.
Totally. Yeah. I find those like hidden curriculum things, like, note taking is like something that all teachers expect you to know how to do, but it is a art, right, to it. So I find those like hidden curriculum topics tend to be really popular. Yeah. And that's another for those who are like, oh, I want more pedagogy stuff, pedagogy background. Transparent design is a method of exposing some of those hidden curriculum lessons to students, and that really again features outcomes as a very significant role in an alignment to those outcomes in transparent design. TILT, I think, transparent in learning and teaching is what it's called. Marianne Wilkums, if I'm saying her last name correctly. Um, so if you want more reading, I'm good at assigning reading tasks. Oh, and I also I dropped in the chat the link to that metacognitive tool that I mentioned. So um, I found it really helpful in framing certain information literacy discussions.
So I'm a MLIS student, and I was wondering if you've had any. We don't have specific tracks as kind of open where you can explore what you want to learn. And I've been looking at academic libraries and archives, so I'm starting to realize as I'm getting further along in the program, it's really difficult to fit in all the things that I want to take. But I didn't know if you had any recommendations for a student to be better prepared in teaching in an academic setting.
Yeah, totally. Well, welcome to the field. It's great. So I always feel bad. I don't mean to discredit the MLIS training. I think that, the MLIS can't be everything to everybody, and it tries very hard. And I think too, and I was in a similar boat where I was like, I'd be willing to work in a lot of different environments. It's kind of like, where can I get a job? In this industry. And so being open with the kind of classes you take that are applicable to a lot of different environments is important. But I would say too, I did briefly dip my toe into the public library waters. Teaching is going to be critical regardless of the environment that you're in. You're going to find informal and formal learning opportunities for all of your patrons regardless. So yeah, I would recommend taking as many instructional classes as you can. The survey I cited is a little outdated about opportunities for instruction. There are a couple, and it's like I always hate recommending, oh, go get another degree. But like the University of Arizona iSchool has a really good certificate, like in kind of in conjunction with the MLIS, you can get a teaching certificate on top of it. So you take additional credits, but something like that I think is really worth it. So yeah, look for the instructional opportunities. Look for internships. That was really huge for me. The reason I got my job was because I did an internship with the library while I was in my master's program. And sometimes it's like not even an advertised internship. Sometimes it's just emailing people and finding someone that you connect with, and they will create an opportunity for you to volunteer or intern if that's an option that's available to you. I was able to make it work for credit. I talked to my advisor at my master's program, and I was like, can I make this internship work as a class? And they made it work for me. So, you know, you can get that dual credit aspect as well. So, yeah, look for those opportunities. Create those opportunities for yourself if you can.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, we are almost out of time. So I just want to call attention to the most recent chat post, which includes a link to Kirsten's website and also her email address. She has indicated that she is open to being contacted by any of you. So please feel free to take her up on that. And as we wrap up, we invite you to bookmark the Dolls event page so you never miss out on future happenings. And with that, thank you, Dr. Hostetler, for sharing your expertise and insights with us today. It's been a pleasure learning with you this afternoon. And we wish everyone a splendid spring semester and hope to see you at another Dolls event soon. Thank you, everyone.